The forests of our world have been host to many odd things over the years. I mean, just look up the horror movie genre, and you'll find all kinds of terrifying tales that are set in a forest setting. The reason for this is simple, that while it is true that forests are vital for the ecosystem of our world, and they do house many plants and animals, if you get lost in one, it can be a very bad place to be. You almost never know where to go, and you never know what you might run into. Plus, with people sometimes taking refuge in the forest for not the best of reasons, they can leave something behind that you didn't expect. With all of that in mind, here now are 20 most disturbing things discovered in forests. Number 20. Humpback whale. Now, to be clear, this humpback whale was real, and it was indeed found in a forest. The twist is that this was found in the Amazon rainforest back in 2019. There are still a lot of details that nobody's really sure about, but the fact remains that as people went through this forest, they soon came upon a dead humpback whale carcass, and I'm pretty sure the first thoughts were, how did that get there? Thankfully, we do know that part of the answer. This section of the rainforest was found near a beach, which sits on an island that happens to be in the Amazon River mouth. That island happens to have a mangrove forest, and that's where this young whale ended up. But how did such a great big whale get all the way into a mangrove forest, you may be wondering? The answer isn't really about the whale, but about the water. The tides in the Amazon River basin are incredibly strong, and equally as important, it's believed that the whale was actually dead in the nearby sea when the tides eventually caught it and brought it in.
Or the key.
In the season that it was in, the tides would rise about 4 meters above what you would expect, which means that the waters would reach well over the beach and into the forest. Then when the tides receded, it just looked like a young whale had ended up in the forest. Still though, it's quite a sight to stumble upon, and it's definitely not something that you see every day. However, even with this knowledge of how the whale got into the forest, it still doesn't go into full detail about the situation. For example, how did the whale die? It was a young whale, which meant that it should have been with its pod, and yet here it was all alone. And furthermore, the whale migration patterns state that the whale honestly should not have been in that area at all. So we're left with more questions than we have answers, and mysteries that surround about this whale. Now it's time for the fancy topic. Yes, this one is going to be an eye roller, but I'm going to do my best with it. This woman's camera caught some creature crawling out of the forest would be a good headline for this one. Take a look at this picture. It shows what apparently is a recreation of an event that is said to have happened in Canada, where a woman was apparently going through a forest and she took a picture of something like this to showcase the thing that she had seen. Now, I know, the point is, this is obviously fake, and I wouldn't be surprised if the still in this fancy topic picture is from some kind of horror movie. It certainly frames as such. But I'll be somewhat subjective here and talk about whether something like this could actually be found within such a snowy forest, be it Canadian or otherwise. Well, the answer is not really, but there is a danger whenever you go into forests like these, and you're not prepared for what's in there. Now look, just taking a look at the so-called monster in this picture, and it's clear that it's meant to be some kind of hybrid beast between a human and various animals, and no such thing actually exists in the wild. Even if you did find Bigfoot, it would not be something like this, and Sasquatch is something that people actually seek out, for reasons that are unknown to many. The point is, while there are plenty of things to fear in the forest, this kind of thing is not one of them. And even if the picture is just a recreation of what actually happened, don't you think we would have heard more about it by now? Don't you think there would have been a manhunt for things like this to try and keep the Canadian people safe? Well, exactly. There wasn't, and Canada is still, well, mostly safe. So, Canadian people, don't fear, or even people who travel to the country, this kind of monster doesn't actually exist, and if it did, and it found you, well, you wouldn't live long enough to tell the story anyways. As always, you can comment down below by using the hashtag FancyTopic, and let me know what you think about what you just saw on the screen. Number 19. Booby traps. When you think about these kind of traps, you're likely thinking about things that you've seen in movies. For example, Rambo was a big fan of these kind of traps because it kept his enemies on edge while he worked around them. However, don't go thinking that this isn't something that happens in the world today and in the past, because booby traps have been used in wartime more than you may expect. And during the Vietnam War, they were littered all over the jungles. But I'm not talking about that war or jungle, I'm talking about in 2012 in a forest in Utah. The place has numerous trails for people to go to and have fun, and it's meant to be a recreational area. That's where U.S. Forest Service law enforcement officer James Schaffler comes into play. He was on patrol in one of the districts of the park, and he found something rather disturbing. As you guessed, it was a booby trap. This trap consisted of a large rock that was fashioned with sharpened sticks in order to create a gigantic spiked ball that would potentially hit an unsuspected victim in the chest or the head. If it had enough velocity, it could have likely killed someone, which is not cool at all in the slightest. Equally as bad, the officer barely saw the tripwire that was meant to activate it, so he could have been its victim had he not been paying such close attention. He then found another booby trap that would have set someone into a spiked pit. What the heck is even happening in Utah? The good news is that no one was hurt, and after some investigation, they actually found who was responsible, and those people claimed that it was just a set of traps that were meant to capture things like wild game. Number 18. Creepy missing persons posters. Now, this one is truly disturbing, but it also has a twist ending that you're not exactly going to see coming. Let me set the scene for you. You're going through Berkeley-Jackson County Park in Huntington, New York. It's a nice day, a nice trek through the woods, and you suddenly realize there's something kind of odd up ahead. And as you get closer, you're going to notice that a certain area has something on the trees. That wouldn't be odd, except that as you then move in, you realize that these things are missing persons posters. They're all over the place, and there's even a cage that's made out of sticks nearby. This is a real thing that actually happened, for the record, and you'll be forgiven for thinking that it's some kind of movie set or idea. Even the person who recorded it and then posted it on Facebook naturally admitted that it was creepy, and they even thought that they might have accidentally stumbled upon a serial killer's den. Frankly, that's a fair guess. After bailing, they then didn't die and went and informed the police, who then decided to go and investigate exactly what it was that the person had encountered because it sounded really weird. So, are you now ready for the twist? Well, after consulting with people who live in the nearby area, the police then found out what it was because it was a setup for a Halloween party. Yes, they promised to take it all down after Halloween was over, and then the case was dropped. To which I have to ask, what kind of Halloween party were they conducting there? Actually, you know what? I don't really want to know. Let's just move on. Number 17. Fairy Circle. Now we'll step away from the weird for a moment into something more natural and potentially supernatural, depending on who it is that you talk to. Have you ever been to a forest or a grassy area outside of one and seen a perfectly placed ring of mushrooms? Well, if so, you've stumbled upon a fairy circle, or a fairy ring, or an elf ring, or some other kind of nerd garbage, whatever you want to call it. Now, it turns out that this is not something for LARPing or Dungeons and Dragons. It's actually a natural phenomena that takes place. These things will sprout up for various reasons, and you can tell when one is there by two visual cues. The first is the obvious ring of mushrooms, which can be over 10 meters in diameter at times, and the second is through the grass itself. If you notice a ring of dead grass, well, that's because the various fungi and roots in the ground kill that grass by sucking out the nutrients for themselves, and it leaves nothing behind for the grass to feed on. From a nature standpoint, it is quite a feat to do this, and yet there are over 60 different kinds of mushrooms that can be linked to these rings and/or circles. On the supernatural side of things, these circles have been tied to all manner of creatures and events over the years, depending on the point of origin. They've been tied to witches, devils, dragons, and more, and it's also said to grant good luck or bad luck depending on what you do. These superstitions are so well known that they were even featured in a recent episode of Doctor Who. It wasn't the best episode, but the point stands. Don't enter the circle if you see one, just in case. Number 16. The Witch's House. Now, I just talked about witches, and here I am going to the witch's house. This house has been quite popular over the years because of its eerie aesthetic, and people have wondered if this is even a real home, let alone one that belongs to a witch. The good news is that we know where it's really at, but whether it's haunted or not, I'll leave that up to you to decide on your own time when I'm not around to see the consequences of your actions. The witch's house can be found on Flint Island, which is located in Denmark. Now, the house was built in the 1930s by a farmer, and his family had apparently lived there for hundreds of years, and even wrote on a tombstone inscription about how the spirit is drawn to that place. The good news seems to be that there honestly is not a witch that resides there, but that doesn't mean that other things don't happen. After all, I've already proven that some weird stuff can happen in the woods, and besides, doesn't the house just look a little too inviting? Number 15. The Screaming Sasquatch. Now, I teased it before, but how about we go on a bit of a Sasquatch hunt? Does that sound like fun? There are plenty of people over the course of history who have wanted nothing more than to be able to find a real-life Bigfoot, or some variant of it, depending on what you may believe in. That brings us to 2019 and the Ontario Forest in Canada. A man was out with his wife and grandson in a lookout area amongst the forest when they heard something that they couldn't explain. Now, naturally, they pulled out their phones and recorded it, and surely enough, there was a primal howl that was coming from the nearby forest, and it was both loud, deep, and not exactly something that you could immediately recognize. It definitely was not a wolf or a coyote, and bears, well, they don't howl like that, nor do any big cats that would have been in this place. So the question then becomes, what was that sound? The video was shown to some official biologist nerds, and they couldn't even tell them what the sound was either. And so, they had some guesses, but they couldn't say for sure. Just as mysterious, the man then went back to the area later on after the event, and he never heard that noise again. So, could it have been a screaming Sasquatch? Or perhaps it was an animal's cry that got distorted by the trees and the distance. There's no true way to know for sure. Number 14. The Breathing Forest. We're going to stick around in Canada for a bit because it's easily one of the coolest things you're going to see all day, and I can 100% prove what's going on here. This stars a man who was going through a forest in Canada one day when he saw something that he didn't expect. He quite literally saw the earth moving under his feet, and not in the sense of an earthquake, but in the ground itself rising and falling in such a way as though the ground seemed to be breathing. Now, if you watch the video that he recorded, you can understand the confusion and the tenseness that he was feeling in that moment. It's not exactly something you get to see every day, and it raises a whole lot of questions about what's actually going on. Naturally, a lot of people took a look at the footage to see what was happening, and the answer became surprising. This isn't a live entity that was discovered, nor was it an illusion, but instead it was the case of wind meeting trees. And if you look at the footage, you'll notice that in the background and the foreground, there's a heavy gust going on. The trees in the area don't only have roots, they have very, very deep roots, and ones that are so big that they permeate the area. So when the winds blew heavily against those trees, the roots then began to rise, and then they would fall and rise again. So there you have it, a breathing forest, and all it took was some extra wind. Number 13. The Dollhouse. Now, I'm just being honest here. Dolls, well, they can be some of the creepiest things you'll ever find. Yes, I know that sounds mean, but if you really, really look at them, they can be truly creepy depending on how they're made. Plus, there are numerous horror stories in areas of the world that are associated with creepy dolls, and sadly, we have another one to add to that list. An urban explorer was going through the woods in Canada and came across an abandoned house that was destined to be explored. How could he not take the bait when it looked like that? As he approached the house, there were a set of dolls waiting for him. And then as he entered, the dolls that were inside began to reveal themselves, and they were numerous. In fact, the only thing that matched their numbers were the stuffed animals that were all around. And as you can imagine, that not only would be freaky to find, but freaky to see because of how broken and decayed that they are over time. It also raises so many questions that I almost hesitate to ask. For example, who was it that lived there? Why did they have so many dolls and stuffed animals? And what caused them to leave the house and abandon all of these toys? Is there something else living there? Thankfully, I'm not likely to find the answers out, but that urban explorer clearly made it out of the house alive, and we should all be grateful. Number 12. Abandoned cars. This next one is disturbing on an entirely different level. So, we've all seen the various car shows and films that feature someone finding a car in the woods or in a barn and trying to restore it somehow. But what you may not realize is that this not only happens, but it happens quite a bit. And it's really weird that people have done it for so long. Because it's not only cars that they're dumping, it's ones that at times we would consider to be classics. The ones that people would have given an arm and a leg to have had when they were in pristine condition, and yet here they are all rusted and rotted and abandoned and alone. It's terrifying to think about, given how well that some people treat their cars today. So why do they abandon them like this? Well, it's hard to say. Maybe they're just lazy and didn't want to get rid of them in the proper way. Maybe they thought it would brighten up the forest, or maybe even dissolve into it. It's really hard to know, but it's such a waste, and people should be ashamed of themselves if they have done such a thing. Number 11. Trail camera bombs. Now this one is real and it's scary. In Harlan County in Kentucky, a man was arrested for putting bombs inside of trail cameras. One such camera detonated on a man and it seriously injured him, so it's not cool at all. But why would someone want to place bombs inside of trail cameras of all things? The answer is apparently that the man had put his own cameras out on the trail in the nearby forest, and someone kept stealing them, so then he put bombs in new ones so that they would have a nasty surprise when they tried to take it away. That's all kinds of scary, and the thought that it was someone's retaliation method shows just how terrifying that people can be. Equally as disturbing, the man was shot and killed after fleeing custody, so that's one way to admit your guilt, I suppose. Number 10. Cambridge Ghost Hunt. We need to cleanse the palate after that last one, so let's go on a ghost hunt. This took place in 2017 in Cambridge, New York. The people of the area were reasonably freaked out when they looked at a picture from a trail camera that appeared to show a little ghost girl. Now naturally, people started going out to try and find proof of this so-called ghost, who had a set of missing limbs in the camera shot. Sadly, for all of those ghost hunters out there, it turned out that this so-called ghost girl was actually a girl in real life. She was a 9-year-old who was very much playing for the camera, and the trail camera merely took a bad shot which made her look and seem like a ghost. Number 9. Mouse deer. When it comes to the animal kingdom, there's just something that we sometimes take for granted. That being the way that we might think that an animal is extinct, but they're just hiding off in an area that nobody has looked at. For proof of such a thing, you need only to look at Vietnam in 2019, when a trail camera was able to take a photo of a creature that was referred to as a mouse deer because of how it looks like a fusion between two common animals. The reason that this is so disturbing is that this animal had not been seen in any form for over 30 years. While it wasn't officially labeled as an extinct thing by official records, people did consider it, and they put it as lost for the time being until the photo and others in the area were taken. Number 8. Stucky the Mummified Dog. In the United States, a person was cutting down a tree when they found something incredibly disturbing inside. It was a mummified dog. This dog had gotten stuck in the tree, died inside of it, and the natural coffin had perfectly preserved the body until the tree was cut down and his body was found. How did the dog get stuck in the tree? Well, it's believed that the canine, nicknamed Stucky, which is equally disturbing, was chasing a raccoon and just got stuck in there. The only reason it wasn't found before was because the scent of death blew away from the nearby people's noses somehow. The phrase, "what a way to go," definitely comes to mind here. Number 7. The Crooked Forest. Sometimes something is disturbing merely because you can immediately identify that it doesn't look right. And this particular forest can attest to that feeling. The Crooked Forest is a grove of 400 oddly shaped pine trees located near the town of Grafino, West Pomerania in Poland. They were planted all the way back in the 1930s, and when you look at them now, well, they're pretty crooked. That bend at the bottom of their trunks is literally unheard of in the world, and the fact that it was able to do that and still be over 15 meters tall takes some doing. As you can guess, there have been plenty of theories about what actually happened here, including unique gravitational pulls to people's alterations and even more. We may never know the truth, and even now no one has a definitive answer for why this section of trees in this forest bend that way, but it's very trippy indeed. Number 6. The Bear Selfies. In today's world, there is arguably nothing more disturbing than people, especially young people, who revolve their entire lives around taking selfies or making videos for things like YouTube and TikTok. There's a reason to fear the younger generation because they aren't really all there. However, we may have found something equally as disturbing, a bear that is also up for taking selfies. Lots and lots of selfies, hundreds of them in fact. Near a forest in Boulder, Colorado, a bear not only went up to a trail camera, but it stayed there so that it could take 400 selfies of itself from various angles. There's no rhyme or reason to it really. The bear had to know what it was doing, and it willingly did it. I mean, what is even going on in the world today that a bear knows how to take a selfie? Let's just pray that it doesn't know about social media. Number 5. Bigfoot. I'm going to level with you on this one. I know there's a lot of people who believe in Bigfoot, and that's okay, that's all good. There are plenty of people who spend a lot of time going to look for Bigfoot, which is not so good. What's disturbing is the lengths that people will go to in order to try and find proof of Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever you call it, and the footage that's sometimes shown that they feel definitively proves that it exists. Every single time, it can be beaten back and disproved with ease, and yet people are still trying to find Bigfoot or proof of it. There were even shows on Animal Planet about trying to find Bigfoot, which really made it lose its credibility with me, and they never found out. That's not a good show to make when you have no payoff, you know. While it's nice to believe in things that are beyond the normal, there are limits that you should impose on yourself, and this is one example of people not doing that. Number 4. Clowns in the forest. There are some things that people never want to find in the forest merely because of what it might imply. In 2006, there were a series of events that happened that featured clowns showing up in places like forests and near schools, and it freaked a lot of people out. Arguably, the most disturbing part was that it was first just a PR stunt for a horror movie that was being done in Wisconsin. However, once that story about the clowns in the forest spread, it soon went international. There were cases of people dressing up as clowns and hiding around in the United States, Canada, and even in the UK. And some people, they just want to watch the world burn in the end. Number 3. Strange sounds. I'll admit that this one is a bit more vague than the others, but it's still something you wouldn't want to have happen to you when you are in the forest. In this case, a group of hunters were in a forest when they began hearing some really weird noises. Sounds that they could not easily identify. They talked about it in the video and even showed footage where they even mimicked the sounds that they were hearing. While it's not uncommon to hear weird noises in the forest, you'll typically be able to recognize something like birds, cat cries, wolves, coyotes, that sort of thing. But this didn't sound like any of those things. So then, what exactly did the hunters hear and try to mimic? Well, it's hard to really say. Number 2. White deer. Sometimes the animal kingdom delivers a surprise that nobody expects. You all hopefully are familiar with the term albino. It refers to animals that are unnaturally white due to how they lack certain things in their skin that give them color. Traditionally, it turns animals white instead of their standard color. However, in Canada, there's a special section of deer that are known as the Seneca white deer, and they are all white, but they are not albino. They are leucistic, meaning that they lack all pigmentation in their hair, but they have normal brown-colored eyes. That's an important distinction, as albinos are always in danger of health risks due to not having the melanin that's needed to retain their color. This deer is only about 100 strong, and many are fighting to keep it alive. Number 1. An airplane. There are a lot of reasons for a plane to end up in the forest, believe it or not. The biggest of them is obvious. It crash-landed there. However, it's not what happened to this plane in the middle of a Malaysian forest that matters. What happened here is arguably more disturbing, as it was a plane that was intentionally brought into the forest to make it into a hotel. And before you say, well, that's dumb, there have been plane motels in the past. However, what's disturbing here is that they tried to make the hotel, and the funding fell through, and so they simply left the carcass of the plane behind. You don't think that someone else could have done something with that plane, do you? I mean, I'm just saying. Well, that's all from the forest of the world and some of the things that have been discovered there that can be called disturbing. Did you get freaked out by any of these things that were discovered? And which are you glad you didn't run into personally? Perhaps you know of something else that could have wound up on this list. Be sure to let me know all about it in the comments section down below. Check out the other cool things that are showing up on the screen, and I will see you next time.